And welcome into Pressbox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles from Pressbox and PressBoxOnline.com. With me is my co-host Gary Stein. Gary, how are you?
Good, Stanley. How are you?
I'm great. And I'm excited to introduce our two guests. And I will in just a moment. Okay, this is going to be a fun conversation about the business of sports in the post-pandemic era. Pressbox Live, though, I have to remind you, is brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. That's right. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. And as I say, every Monday and Wednesday on these Zooms, there is no greater expense than you will have on your home than fixing or putting up a new roof. And you need to know the people. You need to like the people, and you need to trust the people. C3 American Exteriors. I know the owner, and I like them, and I trust them. All right, so there you go. Their website, c3america.com. A couple other people that I know and like and trust. Well, in the case of Andy Dolich, I'm not sure I trust them, but Andy Dolich from the left coast, former executive on all the four major sports. He now teaches and consults in the sports business world. And good friend Marty Conway, who I first met when he was working with the Baltimore Orioles. And Marty Conway now teaches at Georgetown University. Both guys experts in the business of sports. So we're going to talk about that. First of all, I want to ask both of you, Andy and Marty, are your teaching gigs, are they back to normal now at sort of as this year was ending? Were they back to normal?
I'll let Marty go first because he's much more professorial at La Jolla. I work for the School of Continuing Studies at Stanford. So I'll let Dr. Conway go first.
It's a good question, Stan, and it's actually timely. And when you say back to normal, the expectation is that this fall, so the end of August, that students will all be back on campus, and there'll be vaccination requirements and different things like that, and monitoring and testing. But one of the things that's come out of this is the ability and the students' interest in having a distance opportunity. And what I say by that is we've always offered on-campus instruction, and we've always offered online instruction where you sign in when you want. It's kind of asynchronous thing. But what students want now is they want the ability to have a live class synchronously instead of coming into the building. So they could be in Washington, D.C., or they could be in the Bay Area, and every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, they want to log in and be able to have a 2.5 or 3 hour class. So that's one of the developments that's come from it. We'll see if it's sustainable, but it's very clear that the combination hybrid, sort of all different types, it's almost like a retail store saying you can come in the store, or we'll deliver it, or we'll have curbside pickup. I mean, it's sort of what education has become.
Isn't it also, though, and I know I want to get Andy's answer, but isn't that a little bit like, I know, like in the example, my brother owns a nice size advertising agency. Nobody wants to, they're still working, but nobody wants to come into work anymore. Isn't that a problem, the same problem that you're seeing at a university? If people aren't there, doesn't the university experience, isn't it about being there?
It certainly is a big part of it. I would agree with you because that's the traditional legacy experience, right? Having said that, in many other parts of the world, it's not. There's all different types of doing that. And so university students today are becoming more and more like customers, and their ability to shape the offering when they want it, where they want it, almost on demand. I don't know if that will be a good thing long term or not, but it is where young folks and education is, and it certainly is at the current time.
Andy, you find that to be the case out there?
Well, the last two courses that I led at Stanford were virtual, and the multiples before that were all in person. And I run it more like you run the show that we're doing. I bring guests in, great interaction between the students, and class sizes anywhere from 20 to 60, all different types of ages. It's not a degree program like what Marty does. And I happen to like the person-to-person learning experience. And everybody is flying stuff in on Zoom and they're doing this and they're analyzing and they're metricizing, and that's all great. But it's like reading the words in a PowerPoint. Like, you know what? I know how to read. Don't read me the words in a PowerPoint. So I like the integration of human nature. However, I will say in the last class I did, 2 students in Europe, 1 in Hong Kong, 2 in South America. And, you know, wouldn't have that if they were dropping in Palo Alto.
Right, right. I got you. All right. Well, that's an interesting answer to that question. So let's, before I turn you over to Gary to a couple questions, we chatted when Gary and I first started doing this last May, I believe it was, and we talked about what the world of sports was like at the time in a pandemic. Are we kind of convinced, guys, that the pandemic, as far as the world of sports, is just about over, or are we still very guarded? And Andy is shaking his head no,
Vigorously.
vigorously. So,
Yeah.
Andy, you
Well,
got
you
the
know,
floor first.
Twitch is headquartered in San Francisco, and they're a partner of the Fan-Controlled Football League, so I wasn't twitching. And Gary and Stan, and I think Marty has heard this before, I'm a big believer in the new different, not the new normal that
Yeah.
people use. And if you just look at attendance patterns, we've all been going back to games. I went to the Women's US Open, 2 weeks ago, and have been to some other events. I feel that there's just a different vibe in all types of events that you're going to, whether it's a Little League baseball game or an upcoming, game in the Big Four sports. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon, because it's, no matter what Dr. Fauci or other people talk about, then you have a variant, right? You wake up with a variant. And it's like the V just scares the living crap out of people. So I think if you just look at human nature, you're not going to feel 100% safe for a long time, especially when you're entering a venue with 5,000, 20,000, or 60,000 people who you don't know personally.
That's
And
interesting.
I would agree with everything that Andy said, and I would add just a couple of things to that. Number one, I think he's right. The emphasis on public health going forward is here to stay. Now, it may be 10 years from now, it'll be less than it is a year from now. But I think that concept of public health in people's minds, it's not unlike when we went back to games after 9/11 and security became the issue of, are we a target? We had to go through magnetometers. We still have to go through magnetometers, although we don't think about it, right? And I think about how people came back to sports after World War II, right? When there was no sports for a few years, and some of the best athletes in the world did not play during that time period, and how hard it was for some of them to come back. And we're seeing that today with certain athletes who were at a certain age where they were sitting out for virtually a year or almost a year, and how hard it is for them to come back. So I think that's all part of what Andy's talking about in terms of the new normal, which is it's all go forward. There's no pulling this legacy sled up to this point and saying we're all getting in. Like, this is a different sled. We're going forward. And for some people, I think the virtual element will be just fine for them. It'll be replacement or a substitution for them in terms of sports. And they'll be happy to sit home, even increasingly to watch, versus going because of their public health concern or some sort of ambiguity as to what could happen.
And guys, I think it literally is 30 days from today when the Olympic torch will enter the stadium with no international visitors. And I know that they have a domestic level of fans that they're going to allow in. But you think about what a global celebration the Olympics usually are.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an incredible laboratory of us watching day in and day out for a change. The athletes, the spectators, lack thereof, how games are broadcast, streamed, telecast, digitized. This is going to be another holy cow smack upside the head from what we're normally used to.
I just want to jump in, Gary, real quick and follow up with Andy. Andy, that new different that you talked about, you said it's a different vibe. Are you talking about people sitting there at games, like kind of looking around at who they're near? What did that, what did
Yeah,
that?
well, I haven't been to enough events,
Yeah.
but I've always thought that sports is the town square of America. And one of the last places that people from all kinds of backgrounds could be at, celebrate, and not really care
Who was sitting
about
next to you.
anybody's, where you came from, how much
Yeah.
money, whatever. Now, I do think if you just look at the Three Musketeers on any street corner, right? Everybody's looking at each other. Hey, how come you're not wearing your mask? Well, I don't have to wear my mask. Well, you should wear your mask. Do I have a tattoo on my arm that said, I got two, how about you? No. So I think human nature says, I'm going to surround myself with those closest to me, my family, and I'm going to do everything in my power to protect them.
Gary, go ahead.
So, yeah, let me just follow up with Andy real quick, and then Marty, I want to get over to you. So, Andy, I don't disagree with you. I think you're right. People do that. I haven't been to enough sporting events either to really be scientific about it, but it doesn't seem to be that way in other places. In other words, what I'm saying is in bars, restaurants, people seem to be normal, and I wonder from your perspective, perhaps why normalcy basically has returned to bars and restaurants, but not to sporting events.
Again, none of us have our PhDs. Is that correct? Marty, you don't, even you as a Hoya, you don't have your PhD.
I do not.
We have our street learning PhDs. And I think, Gary, the simplest way to answer that is those venues are smaller. And in many instances, we belly up to the bar with people that we've known for 20 years, or a place that we sort of know who's there. But 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people, I'm going through lines, I'm parking, should I wait online for my bratwurst? Where am I going to the bathroom? Those kinds of questions, no matter what kind of sanitization is taking place, will affect our heads. If I think we're sort of in a pebble in a pond, to your point, people are going back to places they trust without, as you say, seeming to worry. But that's smaller. And as we start throwing bigger pebbles in bigger ponds, I just think we're going to see different types of reaction. That doesn't mean it's not coming back and it's not going to keep moving in a positive direction. I just think it's going to take longer than some observers' opinion.
And I would agree. So Marty, I wanted to toss this over to you. Andy and you have both talked about sort of the fan experience post-COVID, and even you, Marty, the player experience post-COVID.
Yeah.
But let's take a step back and talk about how teams and leagues have fared during COVID. A couple of quick questions. And this is just a general question, not a baseball or football or a specific team, but did teams qualify for PPP? Did they get them? Did any teams get rent relief from their stadiums? How did teams fare during COVID economically?
As many teams as there are in the United States, as I think there are use cases as to how that happened, right? And I would say that. So yeah, the answer is yes. Some teams got PPP. Some teams qualified for it. Some teams, I think the Lakers qualified for it and then said, no, we're not going to take it. There was a little pushback there. But I do think I know in other organizations, I would say events, teams, et cetera, did accept it because they were either wiped out completely from their event or they were impacted by that. I have yet to see municipalities reach different agreements on rent reduction or rent relief as a result of that. I haven't seen anything formally about that. But as I said earlier, that one, in the 5 major sports, let's say soccer, hockey, et cetera, there's 150 teams. There's 150 different use cases to how that impacted them. I would say on the one extreme, there's the NFL that only had 6% of its potential fans able to make it in person. And it had virtually no impact on their finances in fact, they probably thrived as a result of that. On the other hand, you look at the NBA, for example, their debt level collectively in 2019 was $4.5 billion. They've increased that debt level to $6.5 billion in 2 years because 8 teams took additional tranches of debt in order to continue to sustain. And so I think you're going to see that play out over time in terms of equity stake sales or other things where there was an impact that we just didn't see at the time, but it's starting to show up in public documents in the NHL or the NBA or some events that have had to take that kind of support to sustain. But nobody in the NFL needed to take anything to get through.
Yeah, but
this sort of winter.
to Marty's point, I would put an exclamation point. So if you look at my former employer that borrowed a large chunk of $1.9 billion to build their facility, Levi's Stadium. Last football season, they sold no hot dogs, no beers, no dessert carts, no jerseys, no this, no parking for X. The Golden State Warriors, $1.5 billion privately financed. How did their ticket sales look last basketball season before this? That was zero. And as Marty just talked about, the bank calls and says, excuse me, I don't care about COVID. You owe us, $38 million this month for your mortgage payment. Oh, well, sorry, we didn't make any money. Oops, well, we're going to have to push that into the future. So if you just think about no transactions coming through the turnstiles, and they don't have turnstiles anymore, right? So in your UPC code or whatever, your hashtag, think about the Olympics. Think about how much money the Olympics is going to lose above and beyond what they were going to lose because nobody's landing at Narita Airport, staying in a hotel, renting a car, having this, that, and the other thing at the Olympics. Zero.
Stan, let me follow up with Marty real quick. Marty, on that note, economics with teams, the opening up policy of different states is different. Many, if not most of the southern states opened up a lot quicker than many, if not most of the northern states. We saw the Texas Rangers sell out their stadium early on. Many stadiums down south are selling out. Many stadiums up north are barely selling, period. Yeah. So the question is, economic inequality in sports had existed before COVID. I'm sure we all know that. Is it worse, or can it get even worse now?
I think one of the key takeaways for me, and I see this repeatedly, and that is the trends that were happening right prior to the pandemic were accelerated and exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So that gap between the Dodgers and the Orioles, or pick any other sport between that, is only going to continue and probably accelerate in how much farther apart they get because of what was happening to them. We didn't even talk about the NHL, where a big chunk of their teams are in Canada. So let alone not even able to play in Canada, had to play an NBA season in Tampa and other places like that for the baseball team in Buffalo. So what is going to happen as they go into collective bargaining and all that? There's going to be so many different things that I think get sorted out, because yes, you almost look from north to south, it was 0 to 100%. And I think you can see that in California, it was, as Andy talked about, was 0, versus in Texas and Florida when it was 50, 75%. And so those inequities are going to be exacerbated. And as I would reiterate, what we saw with the NBA was 4 more teams come in and take advantage of the debt opportunity that the NBA offered and say, I'll take some of that debt because I have to either replace or refinance, as Andy said, those phone calls where I've got to either take on more debt or replace the debt that I had, because I got to continue to make payments on my facility. I will leave you with this one more thing. What happened is, if you look at organizations that took on bold steps, like in Atlanta, they added a soccer team and a stadium with Arthur Blank, versus here in Baltimore with Steve Bisciotti. He doesn't own the stadium. He only goes and plays there 8 or 10 times a year. He has a training facility that was given to them by the county. There was virtually little impact to the Ravens. I know there was some, but on a virtual, versus places like Atlanta and other places and Golden State, who took on this enormous debt to build these big facilities. They ended up worse off, I think, in the end.
And then, another point to a football team that used to play in Oakland that doesn't play there anymore. Stan and Gary, I got stuff, right? I got stuff.
Got a lot of stuff.
You think about the economics of the state of Nevada. Hey, you guys need $1.5 billion for Allegiant Stadium. Fine, not a problem. Oops, we're not making any money Mark Davis, he doesn't have to get a haircut. He doesn't care. I mean, he cares, but it's not a big deal because somebody else underwrote that. And I think long term, I mean, Oakland could be the first city, I think, in US history to lose 3 sports teams in a period of 3 or 4 years.
And that would be the Warriors moving from Oakland to San Francisco.
Right.
Technically,
And
but
if,
the Raiders
if in fact
and
the A's go, because California is not building a publicly financed anything. It's not happening. And if the A's find, Sheldon Adelson's, nephew who's got $200 billion, who knows?
So I want to get back. I definitely want to deal with the Oakland Stadium situation a little bit later on in this discussion. But I've never really thought about the difference between teams and leagues as to where the money goes. Are the leagues themselves in the Big Four, are they all in good shape after COVID? I mean, they've got their coffers full of money.
Well, I'll let Marty come after me because my answer would be pretty simple. If you look at the Big Four,
Yeah.
the NFL, in my view, was the one sport that just bulled its way right over COVID.
Yeah, it was.
Said,
no
we're the
question.
NFL. We don't, just get out of our way. And to reality, they pretty much did that.
Yes.
The other sports, not even close. I mean, when you look at the multiple billions of dollars of guaranteed income that the NFL has, the NHL, it's mouse meat. Basketball, serious. Baseball, a little bit. But baseball needs hundreds of millions of fans. Football could maybe lock down a bunch of stadiums and they'd be fine. They're streaming, right? Live streaming. Okay.
And they delivered to their broadcast partners exactly what the broadcast partners needed. So they're not hurting at all. But what about MLB, the NHL, and NBA? Are their coffers still full of money?
So I would say this, so to follow up on what Andy said, look, I think the NFL could absolutely survive a nuclear winter, right? Maybe nobody else could, but I think for some reason the NFL could. And if you look at the 4 major food groups that I call it, the 4 major food groups, the revenue lines, media, sponsorship, tickets, or venue related things, and merchandise. If you look at those 4.5 lines, this entire pandemic was defined by what is your percentage that falls into those categories. And in the case of the NFL, the lion's share falls into media and sponsorship, which they were able to retain or maybe to roll over. And you work your way all the way to the other end where Major League Soccer and NHL rely upon a great percentage of venue related revenues. And so they were potentially hurt worse, right? Nobody got away unscathed except the NFL. Baseball has about 40% of its revenue coming from venue related ticketing type things. So they got scorched to a certain extent. So it all kind of is related to what those 4 or 5 major revenue lines and what percentage, what contribution they make to your overall revenue stack as to how you came through this 15, 16, 18 months later.
This team, which has got one of the best 3 or 4 records in baseball, 29th in attendance as of right this minute.
Yeah.
Who was 30th in attendance? The Toronto Blue Jays, to Marty's point, because they had to play the first part of this in Dunedin in front of 1,200 people a game.
Yeah.
And now they're in Big Bad Buffalo. Just think about that, where the A's are literally drawing under 5,000 people a game for one of the best teams in baseball. So if you've got a problem, that pretty much defines it.
Yeah.
Maybe the Jays could have played out in Oakland and drawn like 5,000 fans.
I think if it were me, I would have had the Jays in that other stadium in Texas that the Rangers gave up because it's right next door and it's brand new. And I think for some reason, Arlington and Dallas and Fort Worth probably could have supported 2 teams for 6 months.
And, to that point, I would say most of the tailgate places for the Alabama-Auburn football game in a few months are already parked. The people are already there. They're just getting ready for the game.
Before we get into some other topics, I want to talk about the NBA. The NBA, which really spent an awful lot of their resources putting that whole thing and paying for that bubble to play the postseason last year. But then this year, they're now getting some complaints from players that they were forced to play too soon this year. Do you think that's the case, Andy, Marty?
No, I don't. You're finding in today's world more and more that the players, and I'm not taking a point that there's anything wrong with it, are their own corporations.
Yeah.
And they're looking at massive opportunities, not just while they're playing. People like LeBron and Steph and Kevin and others, but they're looking at their lives after basketball. And they don't want to do anything. I think they're being absolutely focused on their health and their family's health. And they don't want to just be told what to do. They want to have some input into the larger economic entity. And, I think they have a right to do that. You're finding more and more athletes that go, hold on a second. Yes, from a legal point, from our negotiations between the Players Association, we gave up that right, but let's talk as human beings. We have a circumstance here that nobody saw coming.
Yeah,
Marty, just to follow up with that,
yeah.
I remember Adam Silver, who's, I think we'd all agree, is probably the best commissioner of the Big Four.
Oh, Rob Manfred, come on, man. Go ahead.
Okay, but
We're joking about it.
well, one of the key things was about the streams of revenue. That's what pushed him to push the Players Association to get the season started before Christmas, because there was so much TV revenue sitting out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it started even with the bubble for 180 million to capture 1.5 billion, right? That was the trade-off that he had to articulate to the Players Association, that if we don't step into the bubble, it's virtually over here in that regard. And then the second thing was, that catalyst to say, even if we can get 72 games in, because we can secure our revenue with our regional sports networks by delivering 72 games, this is what we have to do. To LeBron's bigger point that he raised, which was, hey, I think you're seeing all these injuries occur to do it. Look, LeBron is a great player, but he confused three terms: correlation, causation, and coincidence. I don't think there was either a correlation or a causation between starting and where these guys ended up. Was there a coincidence? Perhaps, I don't know. But I would just leave it like this. Andy talked about his involvement with the Fan Control Football League. The NBA has become the player empowerment basketball league. I mean, it literally exists for those players who Andy pointed out rightly are becoming corporations of their own. And even though they didn't do it, what happened in the Euros last week with Ronaldo, when he swiped the Coke bottle off, what he was saying was, my brand is bigger than that brand. And that was the European Soccer Championships, not just anything out there. And so that's where we're having now, which is we're going to see more of LeBron this summer in Space Jam 2. And that tells you everything you need to know about opportunities for players today.
And when was the last national TV campaign you saw with Mike Trout? Tell me.
It'll be the first one when we.
Well, I mean, you got a guy who's his own corporation at $350 million or whatever, nothing against that. But the marketing engine, and, to your point about the NBA, Adam Silver and the other owners were looking at, okay, how are we doing in Beijing? The National Hockey League was not sitting there going, what about Beijing? Or Rob Manfred wasn't going, how are we doing in Rio? Like, no. But the NBA is truly a global entity, and you got to get them playing.
Gary?
So, Marty, since you're in the DC area, I think I'm going to direct this one at you. Andy, of course, you can chime in. We talk about the 4 different leagues, even five different leagues, and the mixture, the nexus now of politics and professional sports. It's interesting, Marty, that you talk about NBA players being their own corporation, players in general, because corporations now, real corporations, are getting extremely political. The situation in Georgia with the voting rights bill, Delta, Coca-Cola, et cetera, doing what they did. I wonder, though, is the politicization of sports good for business, Marty, in a situation that we find ourselves in now, where fans are slowly trickling back in, and there is still so much uncertainty as to what happens in the near term with sports?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, Gary, and I think it's a great point because it's not something that we had to contemplate. Look, it's as far as the intersection of like I teach a course in global games and it includes a lot about the Olympics and the World Cup. I can go back 100 years and I can put politics in the Olympics where, you know, the wheelchair, I mean, the marathon team in the 1906 Olympics or whatever, like there's all of that that always goes into it. I remember specifically Muhammad Ali. For me, that was the first introduction of politics and social conscious and
Yep.
sports. And I remember specifically how my parents and their friends reacted to that, which was very different than how people react today. And so I think it's always been there. But I do think that you see this concept of sports organizations starting to look a little more like political action committees or social conscious organizations. But look, they're doing nothing more than reflecting the fan base back that they're looking at in the mirror,
Mhm.
which is to say the younger fan base, 18, 34, 36 years old, this is what they expect from not just their sports organizations, but anybody that they buy from. They want to see the supply chain. They want to see human rights. They want to see workers' rights. They want to see all those things in the brands that they purchase from. And that's why they do it. And I think my last point is that's what you can expect to see from sports organizations going forward. And I think it's going to be at times uncomfortable at times, but I think it will continue to ride along with them.
The separation of church and state in sports is over. From so many different perspectives. The crystal ball is not cloudy. I mean, you just look at, Carl Nassib coming out on social media and that being a tidal wave across the country in sports. I'm friends with Rick Welts. He was on the front page of the newspaper here being interviewed as being the first openly gay sports executive when he came out. These circumstances in Black Lives Matter, in gender equity, in the LGBTQ community, I happen to think sports should reflect that. And there's other people that are going to go, no, in our place, we don't want to hear about it, separate it. That's part of the divide in our country now. But in most places, you look at the support that, that Carl has gotten nationally. And if you roll that clock back 10 or 20 years, that probably would have been a completely different situation.
Yeah.
But if I could follow, Andy, it's interesting because in an earlier question, when we talked about fan experience at sporting events and how different it is now, the vibe, you talked about a sporting venue as the community square. If sports are going to get hyper politicized, that community square is now in danger.
Or it's the community square of street corners in this country where people argue with each other, but they do it in a social fashion. I mean, we have a horrible, we have a horrible circumstance of violence in this country, gun violence, because you and I can't differentiate without somebody pulling a Glock 9. Like, hey, can we just have an argument, which is just an argument, and then go grab a beer later? Well, that's the point that I'm trying to make. Yes, it is going to be highly tenuous in a lot of places, or other people are going to go to a venue because they believe that that venue exemplifies who they are and nobody else is there. It's going to be an extremely interesting time.
I think I closed our last conversation roughly a year ago by asking you whether this was sports's biggest nightmare, was people finding that they could live without sports, at least in going to them. Are people going to come back to events immediately and at the level they've attended? Or are some of these things that you just talked about, Andy, are they going to play into the fact that people are just, hey, I'll still watch my sports, but I don't need to be out there?
I think we're going to see different reactions in different parts of the country. These beta tests that we're talking about will be different in red areas, blue areas, yellow areas, and That's going to be a level of complexity that people are going to have to work out. All these leagues that Marty talked about, the bucket of revenue that these people live with, the whole new digital delivery. I would say to your question, Stan, when the UFOs and the ETs decide where to land during NFL games, that is going to be the greatest challenge to global society.
Good one.
Marty, do you have a thought on that question?
Yeah, look, I do. So one of the great business professors' name is Michael Porter. He teaches something called the 5 forces about strategy, and one of the 3 areas that always stick out to us are the threat of substitution, the threat of suppliers, and the threat of competitors. And if you look at sports from a fan standpoint, that's exactly what's happened over the last 18 months. And if you look, in some cases, people have decided to substitute something else for sports. In other cases, it's been a competitive thing. Something else became better for them. And in other cases, they look at the suppliers, right? Amazon is a supplier in that regard as well. So it's all these different things in the chain that impact it. And again, I think that the organizations that have been nimble, flexible, and a little more progressive through this are going to tend to be further ahead than the organizations that either haven't been able to do that because they lack technology, or they lack infrastructure, or they lack investment to do that. And I think that will continue to see the separation. But from the fan standpoint, Andy and Pat Gallagher and all the other great people that I learned from early on in my sports would always say the same thing. And that is, the biggest threat is somebody, when they put their hand in their pocket, they don't come out with money for you. They come out with money for something else, entertainment, comedy, whatever it is to do that. You've got to be within their set of consideration first. And if they don't even consider you, then you have no chance. And I think the last 18 months has probably done some damage to certain sports brands and events based on some of those things that I just mentioned.
There's one other point that before maybe we head off. If you just look at the tens of millions of young athletes, boys and girls, let's call them in the 8 to 18 age group, their lives have been turned upside down. They haven't been able to play for fun or play on a premier team. And that's not going to show itself right away. That's going to show itself a year or 2 or 3, as to what Marty said. Have they just gone to virtual gaming? Have they gone to other types of sports and moved away from stick and ball sports? That's something that hasn't been talked a lot about. And of course, we also have, it's not just the physical challenges, it's the mental challenges that we've gone through in 18 months that you're not going to snap your finger and go, whoosh, they're gone.
One of the other changes in the world of, for lack of a better way to call it, the big 4, is this total introduction, state by state now, of legalized sports betting. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you think that's going to affect all of this and people's interest in sports. Marty?
Well, it leads to more of that gamification concept, which I get. You have people on polar opposites here who think this is going to be all about entertainment and gamification. Ted Leonsis opened the first basically sports book connected to a facility. He's all in that regard. And then I think you'll see some other people in other states, because they're not going to pass this. Look, there's going to be 10 or 12 states that don't have legalized sports betting for sure, because they don't have a lottery, different things like that. And so I think it's another sort of means to an end, which is, can I continue to interest you and occupy you? Forget the outcome now. We're not worried about the outcome because that's for somebody else. I'm worried about the event that happens in the first quarter or at the end of the first quarter, or some sort of other, a type bet that they have, a prop bet that they have in the Super Bowl to keep me entertained and engaged. I think it'll appeal to some people, but there will be parts of the country that say, we don't do sports betting in Georgia or some other places. And so it's just not a factor. I mean, so I think it will be a checkerboard impact.
Yeah, I mean, still, we're going to have tens of millions of people that are not going to be vaccinated for their own reasons. And those are their reasons. They have the right to protect that. I also think one of the other real challenges, we talk about, I'm not a big believer in inflection points. Hopefully, Marty, you don't use that a lot.
I do not.
Oh, it's an inflection point.
I do not.
Well, then see a doctor if you have an inflection point. But But look at
Andy,
NIL.
let me, excuse me, what hat is that? I knew the 49ers
Oh,
hat.
that's the
Yeah.
Kraken, baby. That's the
That's the
Kraken.
Seattle
right.
Kraken.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Kraken.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my good friend Todd Lywicki and Bill Chapin up there. They're sold out. They may never play a game. They're sold out. But the point being NIL. Think about the next Olympics or the Olympics in 28. I'm a college athlete. I'm one of the greatest in the country. I'm also a sprinter. Do I need the Olympics? You know, I just above and beyond my contract that I'm getting as a freshman at this university, I'm making $250 a year. I don't want to go through all that training. I mean, we're seeing so many significant changes to systemizations that have been here for decades. And even though people talk about legalized gaming, how much is the quarterback going to make from gaming in the next Super Bowl? That would be zero. How much is the league going to get? Probably zero. The network, zero, and on and on. It's going to be a while till all this works out. It's not happening right away.
Yeah, let me switch gears here a little bit. And I've always been the two of the things that we're talking about today have always fascinated me, even as a little kid, and that is sports and politics. Okay. but never the twain, never shall the two meet, you know, until basically just recently, although Marty, you're right about the Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali situation back in the day. But I want to reflect on my childhood as a sports fan. And I wonder if you guys see this, Marty, in your professional opinion now with college age kids, Andy, in your career in general. When I was a kid, and I'm probably speaking for all of us here, maybe not, I lived and died with sports. Okay, I lived and died with the Miami Dolphins because I'm from Miami Beach and we didn't have baseball, basketball, or hockey back then. All we had was the Miami Dolphins, and I lived and died with them. And then finally, when I became a baseball fan, I eventually lived and died with the Orioles because they were on in Miami because of the Miami Orioles connection, etc. Do kids live and die with sports today? And if they don't live and die with sports today, what does that bode for the future of sports? And maybe we've already talked about it, this politicization and all these other new things that are going to be happening. But let's go back to the kids for a minute. Do they live and die with sports today?
So while Andy makes another hat change, let me take this one up because I'm sure he has something else for us. And that is, look, I don't know if they live and die with it because my kids are growing and bigger, but I do think this for sure. And that is that what they don't live and die for is the sports team brand. And I think that you see the top 15 Instagram sports accounts are virtually
players.
all are athletes.
Yeah.
Right. They are playing the sport, tennis, whatever it is to do it. And the same thing applies in Madden, right? You can put your own team together. You can mix, you can match. You don't have to play the role of the Ravens or the Colts or whoever that is. So many of us on this, we grew up living or dying with the Yankees and the Colts and the Orioles and all these other organizations. The young people coming through today live or die with Cristiano Ronaldo, Leonardo Messi, Shohei Ohtani now, different people like that. That's who they identify with, in addition to, you know, the influencers and the followers that we don't even know their names today because they're big in Instagram or Snapchat to do that. That's the way to get through them today. If you want to get impressions and eyeballs, is through those individuals and athletes versus the team, the brand or the NBA brand or whatever it is. I think that's one of the key things that I've learned over the last several years.
Marty, let me jump in on that though. Don't you find that young adults also now they pick a great team to root for?
Yeah.
They don't root for their geographic team, the town. They'll pick the Lakers or they'll pick the Cowboys when they're good.
I call those TV teams, right? Which is, I think virtually, if you look at globally, everybody follows their national soccer team, whether it's in England or France, whatever, but their second favorite team is Brazil. Why? Because they play in a certain way and they're always on television and all that. And I think there's a lot to what you said there, which is people are connected to the TV teams, and the NFL is a prime example. They've addicted people to 5, 6, or 7 teams because they know that's good for ratings, which is good for business and good for overall.
Gary, you were talking about your childhood. Mine went back a little deeper than yours. and I put this one on because I didn't have my Brooklyn Dodger cap, but Willie Mickey and the Duke and Terry Cashman. If you said Terry Cashman today, kids would go like, is he a rapper or what's his deal? And, Sandy Koufax will always be my #1 pro sport athlete forever, just because that's how I was introduced to the sport. Today, this rules the day. And, as technology, you only have to walk down any street in any community anywhere to see people are not looking with ease or thinking with their heart and soul. It's all about this. It's all about this. And if you're not, if you're not staying current with that, you're going to be out of business. And who's sitting there for 4.5 hours at a baseball game? If they are, they're doing 17 other things during the game that maybe we didn't when we were growing up.
Interesting. Yep.
Gary, you got another one, or
I'm good for now.
you're good for now?
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back to where Andy Dolich lives and breathes, and that's out in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area.
Going to require a hat change.
Yeah.
Do
Actually,
it.
there it comes.
There we go.
There it is. Billy Ball hat. Andy, when we last left you a year ago, the owner of the Oakland A's and the people that run the A's were talking about how, hey, this Howard Terminal, this is the spot. That had been about 6 months after the college. What was that called? That college that they were going to move?
The Peralta College offices. We
Right.
found our site. There's no plan B.
Right.
What?
Okay. So now we're a year further down the road. And the cost of the stadium, I think, is in the $1.5 billion.
The stadium, yes, $1.5 billion. And the new urban ballpark city is coming in at a sweet $12 billion.
Okay. Well,
You could buy 17 US cities for $12 billion.
are there discussions as to who is going to pay for the new urban?
Oh, yeah. John Fisher, through President Dave Kaval of the A's, has said 14,000 times, 100% privately financed.
Okay.
Sure. And you want to tell us who that privately financed is? No, we haven't seen those terms.
Okay.
So forget about the 12 billion in the project. Think about the billion plus on the ballpark at Howard
Just the
Terminal.
ballpark, right?
John Fisher and Dave Kaval just came back from their second visit to Las Vegas, where they were touring, I can't believe this, 20 sites in Las Vegas. 20 sites in Las Vegas. Is one of them 68 degrees and the other one not? I mean, come on. They're pushing the city on this vote coming up on July the 20th to say, yes, we totally approve the ballpark project at Howard Terminal, except for one minor point. It has no teeth through it. It doesn't really mean anything. And the city hasn't agreed to pay $1. So what's that going to be like? And then if the city says yes to a non-binding agreement with Howard Terminal, the A's will still say, well, we have to look at other alternatives. And if they say no, they're going to say, we're going to Vegas. And then they're only missing one thing. Where are you going to build your stadium? Who's privately financing that? Which city or state, if you're underwater with Allegiant Stadium for the Raiders. So it's a lot of white noise, a lot of yapping. And I believe this saga will be in place so that in several months from now, Stan, Gary, Marty, and Andy can be talking about this with Marty's bucolic background in the suburbs of wherever.
Well, the one differential is that the commissioner of baseball has sort of chimed in now and sort of said, hey, this is going on long enough. We think the A's really should start looking at other options. That is something new. Is it merely to play the community in Oakland and the Bay Area? The governing
You
body?
mean Kennesaw Mountain Manfred? Is
Yeah.
that what you're referring
That's
to?
what I mean. Yeah.
Yes. It's a negotiating point. Rob said the A's asked for it. The A's were on TV last week, Dave Covell, and said, oh, Rob Manfred said we got to look at other places. So it's one of those. The city of Oakland doesn't have the money to do it. Might they look at another marketplace? They're looking at it already. Might they move? You would say, hey, the Raiders, they ain't moving. Oops.
Right.
The Warriors, they ain't moving. Oops. Could happen. Would be a horrible, horrible day because none of those franchises will ever be replaced in Oakland.
Marty, your thoughts on
Well,
what's going on in the Bay Area?
Well, no, in general, what you said about earlier, what Gary talked about too, which is how did COVID impact sports, et cetera, to do that? This has just deepened it, whether it's in Tampa Bay, which they're having similar questions. Look,
Yep.
as Andy pointed out, just as well as the A's are doing and 29th in attendance, I think the Rays are first place or maybe the best record, and they're 27th or 28th in attendance as well. So you have two of your top teams, one on each coast, who can't draw more than 6,000 people and have a stadium circumstance which is unclear at best. Now, add on top of that what cities and states and everybody else has gone through vis-a-vis COVID. Where do we come out? I think there's just another period of uncertainty ahead, which is not good for the game, not good for the other owners who would like to figure out, can we expand? Can we take on new revenue, do things like that? We can't until we know in baseball, these two organizations, where do they fit 5 years from now? Until that's determined, you know, you've got to put everything else on hold.
We're in a Cuisinart of decision-making for many different sports and the future, from little kids running around on a ball field to people being paid tens of millions of dollars to do it at the very highest levels. And I think the great news for Gary and Stan and for Marty is that there's plenty of more decisions that can be debated in the future.
One last topic, because I know at your core, Andy Dolich and Marty Conway, you are baseball fans first, I believe. How is all of what we talked about going to come out of the Cuisinart when they actually try and sit across from one another to create a new basic agreement that will replace what is expiring at the end of this season? Is there a chance they will merely kick the can down the road and say, well, because the pandemic created such a unique situation, we'll play under the existing basic agreement for one more year? Because I certainly don't see how they're going to come together before the beginning of next spring training. Marty?
Yeah, you're right. This pains me more than anything because at the core, yeah, I mean, I've earned my first paycheck working for a minor league team, so it's definitely part of my blood. Look, if you remember how many decades ago the Russians and the U.S. had this mad, mutually assured destruction, right? And I think that's what virtually happened last year in the pandemic year, is they looked at each other in February, March, and April and said, this could be the end. We could not have a season. And I think they got to that precipice, which I think informs them as much as the relationship is dysfunctional and distrustful. I think they now both realize that at some point next February or March, they need to be opening training camps and playing, because there is no plan B altogether to do it. So I don't think, but I do think the players, after 10 years of feeling like the last two basic agreements have not been favorable to them, I think they're going to dig in farther. But I do think that experience, I hope that experience last year going down the COVID path said, hey, this is actually possible where we wipe each other out. And that's not good for either of us, especially now when Mike Trout earns $35 million and not $3.5 million.
There's a lot of really smart men and women working in the game today, selling baseball, who have been shackled without being able to sell baseball. And if I look at the fraternity and sorority of people that I was lucky enough to work with during the many years that Marty and I, and names that he mentioned, turn us loose along with the current people and start selling baseball again. Yeah. My deal is call up Aroldis Chapman, get Rob Manfred. Rob, you stand at a plate. Aroldis is throwing one pitch. If you hit it, then ownership wins. If you don't, the players win. Sit down, shut up, get back to marketing the game. That's what I do.
All right. That sounds good. That sounds good. Hey, guys, I really appreciate your taking what's turned out to be an hour. This is the longest one of these Zooms we've done. Really appreciate it. Okay.
You're going to
Lot of
get
good
billed
stuff,
from
guys. Thank you.
Georgetown at six figures. It's going to be brutal. Sorry, Gary.
Can we do it again sometime in the fall?
Absolutely. Love to,
All
Stan.
right.
Gary, it's
Andy,
been great.
you're not.
I'll have hats, so you
Good, good. Gary Stein, you got anything to close with, Gary?
I mean, I do have another question. It's been, you like you said, Stanley, it's almost an hour. I don't know how deep you want to go,
All
but I
right.
do have one thing though.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
You know, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Huge topic in corporate America these days. The NASDAQ is making rules now. The SEC is making rules now, governing corporations, etc. DEI in the major sports. Are they good? Have they kept up? Is there any pressure on them? I don't really hear much about it. What's the relationship with diversity, equity, and inclusion, Andy, in Major League Sports at this point?
Well, again, I would just look at, let's take MLS, which has players from all over the world playing, and now NWSL getting a little bit of traction. You know, somebody like Megan Rapinoe, who I think, you know, is not just a star on the field, but a star in the world of social interaction and spine. You look at baseball, I don't know, what do we have, 235 international players, Stan, and baseball rosters, and 60 US born African-American players. So are we getting to the right direction there? Hell no. And so work has to be done in all the sports. And ultimately, those people sitting in the stands or not, as we talked about, will be the ultimate arbiters on the future of sports, to what Gary just talked about.
Marty?
Yeah, I think there definitely is a changeover, as Andy talked about, all those areas in the NBA, Major League Baseball, et cetera. There seems to be a groundswell, say in NWSL, for example, of female owners. Bottom line is, until there are more DEI representation in owner suites, I mean, in a serious level, NFL owners, Major League Baseball owners, not just one, not just here or there, but a true diversity of that, that's when things will be able to change in a substantial way. But other than that, we're sort of moving checkers and checks around a little bit here and there, I think, and having a few wins here and there. But eventually, when those 150 teams that I talked about earlier, when 50% of them are owned by DEI, individuals, then I think you can show progress.
So Gary and Stan, I hate to do this, but I got to go on a call that I'm actually getting paid to do. And let's not forget, go to Amazon.com and look at loss of logo. I think I just sent you guys that, right, Marty?
Yes,
you got students, you got to ask them to take a look at it.
I never saw this.
You never saw this? I
No.
just send it to you again.
Yep.
Loss of logo. It's number 122 on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's available on Amazon.com. It's all about the business of sports and entertainment and working in it, and what you do when you lose your logo.
All right.
Good stuff.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
See you guys.
All right. See you, Andy Dolich. Marty, were you wrapped up with what you were answering, Gary?
Yeah, like I said, I think that generally speaking, there's been some progress in certain areas and certain aspects of it. But again, until it reaches beyond the general manager and the president into the owner's level, then I think you will see major shifts in how things are done. But I do give a lot of respect, and I give some applause to many organizations over the last year that have changed in some substantial ways of how they recruit candidates, how they treat individuals, and how they look at things over the last year, 18 months or so, as a result of all these things that have happened. But if you're looking for true change, then you're looking for it at the commissioner level, when you have people of color and women, and owners and people of color and women, when it's not just one here and there or two here and there, that it's a substantial number that really represents the overall population.
All right. Marty, thank you
Good stuff,
very
Marty.
much.
Okay, guys.
It's great to talk to you again, and we'll be talking soon. I want to remind you that Pressbox Live has been brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. And again, your roof is the most expensive part of your home. So you need to know the people you're working with, trust the people, and like them. And that's the way I feel about C3 American Exteriors. Again, C3 American Exteriors, the website, c3america.com. Gary and I will be back next Thursday, correct, Gary Stein?
That's right.
And
Thursday,
I
the
think
1st of
about a
July.
unique time. We don't have to get into it now, but we will talk to you then. Our guest will be Drew Forrester, who has made himself eligible. He's qualified for the U.S. Senior Open. And first of all, I didn't know he was a senior, but that's quite a story. For Gary Stein, I'm Stan the Fan. Thanks, Marty. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.